Hello, everybody. It's Derek Arden again, and thank you so much for joining my web chat show. Today, I'm with Matt Crabtree. Matt's an old friend of mine. I knew him when we worked in a very large financial institution, and in fact, he's a lot younger than me. He was the youngest senior executive in Barclays, and he was also at 28 the sales director of on the main board of a company that was turning over £500 million. So he's a bit older than he was then, but he still looks about 20 years younger than me, which really upsets me. Matt, welcome to my chat show. Thanks so much for joining us. And Matt, you probably need to unmute yourself, so we probably need to get that part of it first. Or are you there okay?
I think I'm here okay.
Okay, well, Matt, I'm just for the record, I'm going to mute everybody, and then if you could unmute yourself, so that will stop any sounds. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I apologise for that slight slip up I made, but never mind. Matt, welcome.
I suspect that's because you're not used to giving me compliments. I'm certainly not used to hearing compliments from you, so that really put us all off for a minute there.
Absolutely, Matt. Well, it's very kind of you to have my book on over your right-hand shoulder. I think that's probably just an accident, was it? But
very, very good read. It's a very good read. Recommend it in all good book retailers. It's definitely.
It's a pity it's not the last one, the up-to-date one, but that's probably the one I gave you for nothing, rather than the one that's available on Amazon now.
Probably so. Probably so. I've probably read it so much I've given it away. I'm sure
absolutely. Matt, this is supposed to be serious. Can we get down to some serious things here? Leadership. You and I have talked about leadership a lot, haven't we? And we have a slight difference of opinion on what leadership is. When I asked you to define leadership, you had a different definition than me, and I find that really interesting because I think loads of people have different definitions of leadership. Both of us have been leaders for a long time in various operations. My biggest surprise was when I became the leader of a association, the speaking association, and found things didn't work quite like they worked in a large structured organization. But my definition of leadership is helping other people make things happen and giving them direction, whether it's my children, my friends, whatever, and you may do it subliminally, etc. But I think we have a huge responsibility towards leadership in 2020, particularly as we come out of these turbulent times. Matt, what's your definition?
So I think leadership is something you know it when you see it. So I'd say Greta Thunberg's a leader, Marcus Rashford's a leader, Jacinda Ardern is a leader. You know what it is when you see it. The reason that you're hinting at a difference of opinion is I'm just not sure definitions are terribly useful when it comes to leadership. I also think there are hundreds of thousands of people all over the world who've been doing tiny things over the last 3 months that have been leading in their communities, leading in their teams, leading in their families. I spent some time coaching a guy this morning who's got 3 children under 10, and his wife unfortunately suffered with coronavirus very early in the pandemic, but was out for 5 or 6 weeks, and he's been the leader of his house domestically. He's been, homeschooling and teaching his kids. So I think leadership is just, you know what it is when you see it, and the definition, I'm not sure it takes us anywhere. There are, as you say, as many definitions as there are people who choose to opine on the subject, but I think role models are the best place to start.
Okay, and would you say Donald Trump's a role model? Sorry about that.
I would not, but I'm not a US citizen, and therefore I think there are, for a very large number of people, certainly in the last election, they considered him to be a leader. Now, maybe what you want to go to is the cause behind that, rather than the symptom, which is, I suspect, what he represents. I suspect we spend rather too much time in the world talking about that particular individual, and not quite enough time talking about why, as a society, they have ended up having to have that as a decision. Why have millions of people felt compelled to choose somebody who describes themselves in that way? I think that's a more interesting debate than somebody who will be probably yesterday's news, certainly in 4 and a bit years, and possibly in 4 and a bit months.
Well, we might bring our American friends in towards the end of this, but as you say, Greta Thunberg and Marcus Rashford have certainly done some great leadership, and it's very interesting how young people can lead now. I think the millennial generation is going to look at things very differently to the way, well, I was going to say baby boomers like you, Matt, but you're not, you're too young to be a baby boomer. Baby boomers like me. What's your take on that?
It's interesting. I often ask, I'm sure lots of people watching know Graham Codrington, and I always have to ask Graham, which group am I in, Graham? And he seems to have flexibility with his definitions of those. Young leaders, I don't know if anybody's been listening lately to an amazing podcast. It's on the BBC World Service. It's called 13 Minutes to the Moon. And it's about the 13 minutes between going around the moon, breaking up, the unit breaking up and going into land. It's a fantastic podcast. Do you know that the average age of people in mission control during that event was 27?
No.
And this is some time ago. I'm a bit of a space geek. I have on my wall right here a picture of the International Space Station and another picture of Apollo 11 signed by one of the astronauts. And I was 1 month old when man first stepped on the moon. Young leadership's always been a thing. There's nothing new about millennials being especially good leaders. I also think, and Graham Codrington and I have had a few good debates about this over the years, that talent has always stepped up. And whether that talent is 75 or 17, I don't think makes an enormous amount of difference, to be quite frank. I know as many troublemakers who are in their 70s as I do who are teenagers. And I think we have to sort of get slightly past some of the stereotypes. I think we can, my humble opinion is, somewhat over stereotype generations. We're getting ready now to do it with Generation Z coming into the world of work, and we're going to decide what they want. And we've convinced ourselves, haven't we, in the last 10 years, millennials want autonomy, they want development, they want to be able to do special things. That's what I wanted when I was that age. I still want it now. I still would like to be treated like an adult and spoken to maturely, and I'd like to have lots of different opportunities. The world is different, of course, but I do think we enjoy putting people in boxes. It's a sort of intellectualized thing that we like to do. And I think it makes leaders quite lazy. I do think the millennials have probably been the most over-stereotyped generation the world has ever known. And I think a lot of it is nonsense, frankly. I just don't think it's true. And I think you miss out on talent when you stereotype people.
Very interesting. Actually, you made me think there that people are being labelled more than ever in 2020, aren't they? All these different issues, Asperger's, autism, and you name it, they've been labelled with it. And then they come up with things like the imposter syndrome, and then they come up with other things, and they call it a syndrome, as if it's a real problem rather than a phenomenon or whatever, just something that everybody gets sometimes, a lack of confidence. Yeah, that is really interesting. Turning to what you do, Matt. Now, I know that you coach some boards of pretty big companies, in fact, very big companies, and you work with a lot of people. What do you actually do with them?
I mean, so there are a couple of aspects to my working life. One is I run a consulting company called Positive Momentum, and I work with principally former business leaders who've got to a certain stage in their career and have decided to go into consulting. So we're sort of like the opposite of a lot of the mainstream consulting firms who bring very talented, very well-educated young people up through the ranks, and they often then go on in their corporate life. With a sort of the other way around, with people like, maybe you and I, who did all right in corporate life and then got to a certain point for all manner of reasons and decided, wanted to have a different, more plural life and work as a consultant. And around the world, we have about 40 people in Positive Momentum, and I'm very privileged to work with them and to help them to build their consulting practices with their clients. My work principally centres around growth and leadership. So in our firm, we focus on change, growth and leadership. I'd say my particular areas of expertise are growth and leadership. And as you say, I work with, some teams of senior leaders in various places around the world. And it's typically about helping those very senior groups to operate in a cohesive way. And I'm sure lots of people watching this have been members of senior leadership teams, and have been functionally highly competent. In other words, the thing that they know how to do, and they're brilliant at it. And so they eventually arrive at a team of cross-functional experts, and somehow that team has to coalesce. And it's tough, because when you're at a stage in your career where you've excelled, you're an expert in operations or finance or information technology or sales and marketing or whatever it might be, you then suddenly have to collaborate with people, properly collaborate with people, which hitherto you haven't really had to do. It's been okay to be just a brilliant finance director or a brilliant HR leader. And it can be a bit of a shock, and actually some don't really accept very readily that when you arrive in an executive team, half your hat is your functional expertise and the other half of your hat is your responsibility to lead the organization together with a group of people. And so I spend quite a lot of time with teams like that, helping them to develop those relationships, helping them to develop their strategies, helping them to be able to challenge each other constructively. Not, I've worked with teams where there's no challenge, and I've worked with teams where there's too much challenge. I often describe it like a cogs in a machine. You need friction in a team, especially in an executive team, but you need just the right amount of friction, right? Too little friction. We're not trying to have everybody sitting in the car park singing Kumbaya together holding hands, right? Then there's no friction, no heat, no innovation, no progress. But too much friction and the machine stops. And the interesting thing for those who are engineers will know better than I do is that when a machine stops like that, these cogs actually don't break typically. Typically what happens is something further down the machine breaks. And in an organizational context, that's a more junior leader or somebody at the coalface. They're the ones who suffer the misery of the broken machine. It's not actually normally the senior leaders. The senior leaders, come on, bring it on with each other, and there's friction. And some of them like it, to be honest, right? Some of them are motivated by it, like they like the adrenaline rush, and it doesn't affect them. But further down the track, maybe a customer, maybe a stakeholder, a business partner, maybe even an investor, they're the ones who suffer the pain and consequences. So yeah, a lot of it is calibration, is just helping that process, because there's no perfect leadership team, just like there's no perfect leader, right? It's about kind of calibrating, maintenance, helping both at an individual level and at a group dynamic level. And we typically work from both angles, both with people as a whole human and then with a team as a whole team.
So you've got a bit of conflict on this particular board, the imaginary board, and between two people. They're opposite ends of the spectrum. They don't particularly like each other. They both might be not willing to compromise. How do you handle that?
I mean, I just really have never come across that, Derek. I don't really know. I think of a time that's happened. I mean, it happens all the time, right? It happens all the damn time. And it is a question I think of not over responding to that kind of thing. That situation can create a conversation that team has not been willing to have. And so whilst everybody else sits around and goes, oh goodness me, Derek and Matt, they're kind of at each other again, everybody's terribly uncomfortable with it, actually Derek and Matt are okay, because Derek and Matt are trying to really resolve something, and the way that they do it is with some of this. Now, the situation you describe is one where no compromise is possible. Well, where no compromise is possible, that misses the point entirely. And you have read about coached negotiation for pretty much the whole of your professional career, and you know better than I do that business is compromise, right? And in every respect, in every level. It doesn't mean mediocrity. It doesn't mean accepting things being bad, but it does mean a willingness to have the discussion, debate the subject, and then decide. So I spend a lot of time stepping through that process with leaders. Let's have a discussion. So let's ask each other for a bit more information, right? And show each other a bit of professional respect to understand actually the situation fully. Let's have a bit of a debate. I'm going to give you my fulsome opinion. You're going to give me yours. And then we're going to remember that we're responsible for tens, hundreds, possibly thousands of other people. And we're going to come to a decision which will require one or both of us to decide. but we have to get past self-interest. You have to get past the desire to be right. Right? There is no right in running an organization. There are often just least worst decisions, as most people who are watching this will know only too well. And getting through those least worst decisions is about treating each other with professional respect, but not being frightened to lean into a debate, but remembering that endless debates hurt people. Typically not the people who are having the debate. They hurt customers, frontline workers, shareholders, sometimes regulators, any number of communities.
Fantastic. So tell me, do you get these two people in a room on their own, which sounds like a bit of a mediation to me, or do you get them individually first? What's your process? Because I know it's good.
So, like any good consultant, the answer is it depends. But step one is observe the behavior. Right, so I don't want to hear, typically I'll hear about it, right? So, either an observer to it or a participant in it will go, oh, I can't believe, Derek's an idiot. And I go, okay, well, that's all very interesting. That's your opinion. I want to observe it in real time. So I spend quite a lot of time either sitting at the back of boardrooms or sometimes sitting around the table, listening in and gathering evidence. At the moment, I spend a lot of time on these sorts of sessions, quietly watching. Actually, this medium's been quite useful because, you can turn the camera off, right? And I can be part of a board meeting without being part of the board meeting. And then you watch how people really behave and look at their body language. And I get a sort of Machiavellian kick out of that. I want to see the behavior. I want to then try and address it on an individual level. So I want to then go to the individuals. But the critical factor in all of this, and all of us who are consultants have to remember this, is that our job is to make ourselves redundant. So I don't want really to be the person who is the savior. I want that team's boss, the CEO, the managing director, whatever title they carry, I want to help them to resolve it. And so before I get the two people in the room, I want to coach the individual whose job it is to see if they can resolve it and see if I can help them to develop their skills in resolving it, first on a one-to-one basis and then on a kind of trilateral basis between all of them. Sometimes it's so bad that I do sometimes get invited to intervene, and that's typically with the two protagonists,
sure,
often including their boss as well, though.
Okay.
Because and lay it out on the table. I am, sometimes foolishly fearless, and I don't mind calling stuff out, right? Because I don't have a career to worry about inside that organisation. I don't have any political axe to grind, and so I'm relaxed about putting it out, but in a discreet, respectful, secure, safe way. And one of the biggest jobs to do is often to stop leaders bad-mouthing each other outside of what we might call in the UK the cabinet. There is such a thing as cabinet responsibility. I think it's long been forgotten in this country, but the notion is still alive and well, which is that you want to say stuff about each other, you say either privately or in the sanctity of the boardroom. Outside of that place, you have to be a defender of every other colleague who's on that team. And if you don't like that, that's okay. You don't have to be on this team.
Yeah,
if you're going to be on this team, you're going to support each other publicly. And if you can't do that, that's okay. You can't stay on the team, though. And therefore, we need to have it out privately to the extent that we can resolve it, whatever that resolution might be, and go forward.
Fantastic. Now, we've both been in similar situations, haven't we? We've worked in a highly political, highly charged atmosphere in one organisation, and then we've both worked for ourselves, not wanted to report to anybody either. Isn't it fantastic to be able to step in and gently call it as you see it? Now, my next question is, I read in the Financial Times a little while ago that 1 in 5 chief executives are psychopaths. This was all linked to the TV program Killing Eve, when she was clearly a psychopath, and then they started writing about psychopaths. And I thought, no, that couldn't be possible. And then I thought back to some of the people I worked for, And then I thought, no, it is possible. I do understand that. And it was a loose definition of psychopath. It was sort of alpha male or alpha female off the scale, my way or the highway, etc. Have you worked as a consultant for people like that, or do they not employ you because they think they know it all?
So I think it's commonly said that CEOs can have sociopathic tendencies.
Okay.
And I think, to be a CEO of a business, especially a large business with any kind of public element to it, requires a very special set of skills. Yeah. And frankly, to even want to do it, you've probably got to have something slightly wrong with you, right? Because it's an incredibly exposing thing to do. I have a couple of clients that I have who I'm reasonably close to are CEOs of FTSE 100 companies, and I know them. I'm trying to boast, I just know them reasonably well. And I know the struggles they go through mentally about how exposed they are, about, the impact that it has on their family life, not just because of the amount of time that they spend, but because of the scrutiny and interest that there is in these people, because we've made business people into celebrities. We've created these expectations for people that are really, really outsized. Now, you'll be unsurprised to hear me say, based on the earlier conversation about millennials, I think CEOs are also wildly stereotyped. I know some people who are, very junior people in organizations who are fruitcakes. So I don't think it's especially reserved, crazy behavior is especially reserved for CEOs. The pressure is immense. I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for them. They get paid exceedingly well, generally speaking, but their tenure can be very short. And therefore, it's not unsurprising that occasionally some of them behave somewhat extravagantly. I do think it's improved enormously. I'm very lucky to work with some CEOs in some reasonably well-known organizations who are incredibly progressive. If you look on a public level, if you look at what, I don't know her particularly well, I've met her a couple of times, if you look at what Alison Rose is trying to do at NatWest, it's incredibly progressive. She has a real sense of purpose for what many people will know is a hugely complicated organization, both commercially and politically. Another Alison Britton, who runs Whitbread, that manages Premier Inns, is another incredibly progressive leader who's done amazing things through coronavirus, using Premier Inns facilities for good, and not needing, by the way, to talk about it everywhere and have it published in every other newspaper going. So I do honestly think the world is there are many more positive examples than the fruitcakes. Are there a few crazy CEOs out there? Yep. But there are a few crazy people who do all sorts of things out there, Derek. I don't think that's exclusively reserved for CEO.
Absolutely. I think I better put fruitcake into my dictionary, Matt, because I use a stronger word than that, which is probably unappropriate. Now, hang on. There's only 3 female CEOs in the FTSE 100, and you've mentioned 2 of them as your example. Is this a feminine trait, or am I getting into dangerous ground that we're not allowed to in 2020?
I don't think there's anything remotely dangerous about it. We run a client event once a year on behalf of the Prince's Trust. So we raise money for the Prince's Trust, and we invite CEOs, and I over-index on female CEOs. Why? Because I think they're underrepresented, and I think they're typically really very talented. I'm the father of 2 daughters. I have an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old. And I think there are some incredible role models out there, both public sector and private sector. We work with Claire Marchant, who's the chief exec of UCAS. We work a bit with Lara Burrow, who's the chief exec of the Economist Group. So you get outside the FTSE 100, there are leaders, both female and from other underrepresented communities, growing and growing and growing. Now, I personally think we need to do an enormous amount more, from education through to how we support people through their careers, to make sure that every community is appropriately represented, at the highest level of business and at the highest level of decision making, to the extent that people want that for themselves. And I think we have a lot of work to do. I think it's undeniable we've made progress, but if the last few months have taught us anything, it's that we've not made anything like enough progress. And a good sharp kick in the pants has done us all the power of good, I think, and will be another big step forward. I'm convinced, but you can't take your eye off that ball, not for 1 second, because we're not there. You know, it's about making sure every underrepresented community gets every opportunity possible, and isn't discriminated against in any manner.
Absolutely, and that's all coming out now. Although some people do say it ought to be the best person that's picked for the job, not because they are from a minority group. But we won't go into that. But that does seem to be an important criteria to me.
But those two things are not in contradiction with each other, Derek. Not remotely in contradiction with each other. You absolutely should choose the best possible person for it, but you need to make sure that you're looking at the whole field. And we don't look at the whole field, right? And we know that we don't look at the whole field, and we must look at the whole field of talent. And when you look at the whole field of talent, of course, exactly the right people will rise to the top, and that should represent very accurately the proportion of different backgrounds that people have. And today, that's not a fact. It's not proportional. And until it's at the very least proportional, we have more work to do.
Fantastic point, that, Matt. Fantastic point. Now, I always ask everybody this, and you probably aren't prepared for it, so sit back and fold your arms and go defensive on me. Yeah, that's good. We're teaching people body language all the time. What's the most difficult or the most embarrassing situation that you've been in?
Professionally?
Yeah.
The most difficult. So we had a client a few years ago who was in a strategically very difficult situation, and I won't be too specific because it's very confidential.
No, please don't.
But they were in a strategically very difficult situation, and the leadership team was not really very accepting of points of view that were contrary to their own. And we, myself and two colleagues, presented to them in their boardroom, and one of my colleagues, who happened to be a female colleague, was spoken to in a manner I consider to be inappropriate,
sure,
at the very least. And we walked out.
Good for you.
Pretty happy that we did, and didn't work with that organisation again. Now, if I go back to my earlier comments, it is very difficult to run an organisation, and in hindsight, you look back at situations like those, and it's not a one-off. It's pretty rare for us to walk out, but it's not exceptional that the emotion and the pressure of running an organisation gets to people. It's not unusual, and you have to have a little patience, empathy, tolerance for that kind of stuff. But for me, there's a red line, and that line got crossed that day, and it was uncomfortable, but it was the right thing to do. I don't think they gave a damn, but I think they were probably pretty glad to see the back of us, and they've gone on and done just fine. So I mean they're okay, but I think we all have to be very clear about where is our red line, right? What is it that we are willing to tolerate, and what are we not willing to tolerate? We're just, as an organisation, going through the process of applying to become what's called a B Corp. So some people listening will know what a B Corp is.
I've no idea what that is, Matt.
So it's a standard. You are audited. It's a standard of responsibility, essentially, for your organisation that transcends every part of your organisation, from your environmental responsibility to your community responsibility to transparency of information to making sure that minority groups are appropriately represented, etc., etc., etc. It's an incredibly high bar to leap. The organisations that have leapt it, it's impressive. I thought it'd be easy. It's been incredibly difficult. But I'm very hopeful. We're in the final stages of our application, and I'm very hopeful that we'll achieve it. really reminds you how incredibly tough it is to run an organization with so many competing priorities in the 21st century. It's kind of sobering. And so when you go through that process, it's good for consultants to go through that process with your own business. It makes you examine your own business in a way that, you know, we're often piously examining, judging, opining on other people's organizations. And it's a right good thing to look at yourself. And it's a bit of a shock.
I bet.
And it reminds you why people behave as they do, because the competing priorities are legion. They are, you know this, you come out of the financial services industry, you've got in every country of the world, you know, really, really tough regulators who are making it safe, but in doing so, make it very challenging to do what, you know, used to be recognized as common business practice. But you've also got shareholders who say, well, I want to get a return, and, you know, I want to know what my, you know, what we're going to get as a return on equity and tier one capital. That's all very interesting, but, you know, how much is the dividend going to be? And these priorities cause pressures, and these pressures cause emotions. And, you know, the older you get, I hope the more tolerant and empathetic we all become towards that kind of thing.
Sure, I work with a number of charities as well, and the regulator in charities, safeguarding and all sorts of things is horrendous. And yeah, chief executive of charities don't get paid a lot of money either for all that responsibility and personal responsibility that they have to take as well. Matt, we're almost coming to the end of the interview, but I would like to ask you what your hot tips are going forward for people listening to this, not only live, but on YouTube and the Negotiators podcast channel later on. So how about three to five tips?
Oh, 3 to 5. God, okay. I mean,
well, we have to have odd numbers, don't we? We know that. That's how it works as presenters.
I think number one is about what we're living through right now. You know, lots and lots of people, if not everybody who's watching this, will have lived through various economic crises. This is my fourth. I entered the world of work in the early 90s. It's my first, and I very much hope my last, public health crisis. But from an economic point of view, it's not new. We go through these cycles, and we're clearly, you know, we're coming out, certainly in this part of the world, of the horror of the public health crisis. But we've got an economic challenge ahead of us. What I think it's desperately important to remember is every economically challenging period has created new businesses, new industries, new products, new demands, new consumers. Now, Walt Disney was founded in 1929, just after the Great Depression, FedEx in the early 70s, Groupon in 2009, 2010, after the financial crisis. The opportunities for people who keep their eyes open, who lean in, who see what there is, and stay connected to their customers, connected to their people, this will be a halcyon period. It will be looked back on as a halcyon period. And I actually think we owe it to both the lives that have been lost and to those that have suffered and those that have risked their lives to rebuild our commercial society, given that's what most of us involved in this are most concerned with, that's where we can add the most value, is to rebuild commerce in a way that's better than ever. And we do it every time. We improve it every time. This is a big one. We can do some brilliant improvement. This is the time for innovation, for talking to customers, for leaning in. Really, really go for it. We're examining ourselves as a business. We you know, and we've had our business blown up, like loads of people have had their business blown up, and it's a good thing because it allows us to rebuild it in a better way in every respect, both from a performance point of view, but also from a responsibility point of view. Second tip.
Well, that was about 10 actually, Matt, but we'll take the second one as well.
Is it? All right, okay, I'll do one more then. I'll do one more. That's just be kind.
That was great.
Just be kind. If we have found anything in the last few weeks and months, it's a level of kindness to our communities, to our colleagues, to our clients, that if we can hold on to that and we remember what our purpose in life is, then we can make enormous difference. Yes, commercially, but more importantly on a society level. Be kind, listen, learn, adapt. My goodness, have I learned things in the last few weeks. I have a 20-year-old history graduate who is very, very mobilized by Black Lives Matter and I spend most evenings over dinner being taught. My teaching job is done with that one, and she is teaching me, and I am learning more than I ever might have imagined.
Wow, that's brilliant. Matt, we've got a few questions in the chat box, a few statements as well. I'm going to read out one or two of the questions, if I may, to you.
Sure.
Is there a type of person or a type of company you would not work with? Their values versus yours?
That's a funny question. Somebody asked me that yesterday. In fact, in the firm, we debated that yesterday, because part of the B Corporation process is being clear on who you will and won't deal with. And actually, B Corporation enforces on you a process for assessing suppliers, customers, and ensuring that all manner of things, like they have processes in place to ensure modern slavery disappears, that they responsibly source products. Off the top of my head, I've never had to encounter that situation, so I've never had to make that decision. We have dealt with very large fast food businesses. We've dealt with fizzy drink businesses. We've never dealt with the tobacco business, but we've dealt with oil and gas businesses. So we do deal with businesses who some would consider to be not delivering for the world. Now, my argument back to those people is these organizations create employment, and the people I meet, I've never met people who are evil. The people I meet are trying to do the right thing for the world. They really are, and they're trying to be more positive. So I haven't yet ever said no to anybody, but I haven't had a truly evil organisation yet to ask for our support, and I very much hope I don't.
You reminded me of something there, Matt, which my biggest regret in Barclays was I didn't turn down, and I slept on it, taking over the account of the cigarette companies. I was asked to, and I should have turned it down, but people didn't tend to turn down things in those days, and I wish I had. So thanks for reminding me of that. From Jill, given that CEOs have to have confidence in their decisions, and the historic tendency is to recruit people like me, people like them, how do you promote the message that diversity of ideas is critical to the lifeblood of the business to help them widen their field?
Well, we just keep giving that message out and out and out into the world, and we don't stop until such time as we are faced with truly, genuinely diverse communities and our organisations. You just don't stop. Now, by the way, I don't know many CEOs who don't know that it's important to do that. So I don't know many who are actively recruiting people in their own image. I know they're unconsciously doing it, so I get the whole unconscious bias thing. But there is so much control, especially around listed organisations now, and so much analysis of their makeup of their boards and makeup of their executive teams that the message is out there. Now, that doesn't mean we need to give up on the message. We need to maintain delivering that message. Most crucially, however, we need to make sure that talent is coming up through the organisation, that people from all walks of life feel that they can legitimately get to the highest levels of organisational life if they so choose to, and that your background, the school you went to, and these kinds of things are less of a feature. Now, the problem that we have, certainly in British society, is that our government, our most well-known institutions, unfortunately, are not that diverse. And so we've work to do in the public sphere to make sure that in private organisations that continues to happen. But we just don't let up on it. But I don't know how, there's probably lots of people listening to this who are much more connected to boards and execs than I am. I've got a handful of people I talk to. Everyone I talk to, they get it. They're there. They understand it. Now the hard yards happen of making sure that talent rises up through the organisation as quickly and frictionlessly as possible. And what we have to acknowledge is there is friction throughout organisations. This is not just about the access to the boardroom and the exec suite. I wish it was. If it was only that, we could probably solve it in a couple of years. It isn't that. It's at every level. And it's pernicious because it's unconscious. There are very few people actually deliberately doing this. But it's that unconscious nature that we have to tackle by keeping the spotlight shone on it.
Fantastic. I've still got 2 or 3 questions in the chat box. I want to ask you them, but because of the time, we just have to answer this fairly quickly. And I know you and I will answer them afterwards if
Sure.
people want to email us. Do your skills in business help with your personal and family responsibilities? I bet the answer to that's yes.
Oh my God, yes. But in my life, having young people around me, kids, nieces, nephews, friends, children, has taught me more than I can possibly know. You'd have to ask my wife whether it's improved my skills as a husband. I suspect I might not get an enormously good report on that, but nonetheless, it's made me think a lot about relationships, a lot.
It's very often your long-term partner that calls it as it really is, isn't it? But we don't like it. I'm just thinking about folding my arms as I'm saying that at that point. COVID and working from home has shown a radically different way of working and communicating. Zooming can be a great leveler. How do you advise leaders to make the most of Zoom?
So the quick tip is look down the barrel of the camera. I'm looking down the barrel of the camera right now. So if you're looking at my picture, your brain is tricked into the belief that we are getting eye contact. If I look at your picture, Derek, I'm looking like this.
Sure.
So now I'm not looking at you. Now my brain thinks we've got eye contact, but yours definitely does not. So until I do that, you don't know we've got eye contact. Personally, I think this has been an absolute boon for the way that we operate. I took 138 flights last year. 138 flights. That is not sustainable in every definition of the word. That's not just sustainable. And in our house, we have the joke that Dad was peak flight in 2019. I'll never fly that much again, ever. This is all right. I know it's driving some people nuts, and I don't want to do this all the time, but I'm going to do it a whole ton more than ever I did before. Look at this. This is great. We're having a conversation. I can see a few old friends and make a few new friends. It's cool. I've communicated with friends and family and colleagues many times more than we were before. It's pretty good. This technology works.
We've done 38 of these so far in 13 weeks, and I've met some great friends, some fabulous people from the States, all over the world. It's absolutely brilliant. But you are so right about a lot of people don't know how to handle Zoom or look down the camera, etc. That's really, really important. Right, next story I'm reading the chat box. I know I'm not looking you in the eye, but I'm feeling very guilty about that, going a bit red and embarrassed over it. What's changed since you started your consultancy when you do due diligence? Is there anything different now in 25 years ago? That's a summary of what Jerry DeLacy said.
The honest answer is at the core of the work that we do, no, not much. Not really that much. The cycle time of things is quicker, but that's natural, right? That's, I don't know, what do they call that, Moore's law or whatever, you know. I mean, the change process gets faster and faster and faster. There's no doubt about that. But the core of the problems are the same. They're about relationships with individuals. It's about picking talent. It's about making good decisions. It's about taking calculated risk. I suspect consultants 100 years ago were working on principally the same things I'm working on now. And I wouldn't half mind betting it might be quite the same in 100 years. Now, if you're a specialist in automation or areas like that, then of course your life is very different to how it was 20 years ago. But honestly, the core of the kind of work we do is more or less the same. I mean, I founded this business in 2003. People were talking about data management, CRM. I ran a very early .com business, or it was part of the team that ran an early .com business with Barclays, and we had similar challenges to the challenges that .com businesses have now. So I don't want to sound like some sort of slightly old fart who says, well, it's all the same as it always used to be. Of course, there's a thousand things, a million things that are different, but at the core of it, it's about relationships, it's about talent, it's about being willing to make choices and commit to them and go for it. And I'm pretty sure that's always been the same, and I'm pretty much think that it always will be.
I think it says all that in all the good books that have been written all around the world. Socrates and Plato were even before those, weren't they? And they were saying the same thing, I think. Just a couple more, Matt, if you, sorry about your time, I understand that. With those of us with smaller businesses than yours, Kevin, myself, do you recommend a project by project approach or an open-ended consultancy where we're there 24/7? Actually, that's something I'm wrestling with now. Do you have a different price for 24/7 or etc.? What's your take on that?
So I'm going to give you the consultant answer again, which is it depends. I mean, we do every shape and size of consulting arrangement. We don't have a fixed product. So I have clients who I work with on a monthly retainer, and I've been working with them for years, and I assume they still feel that I'm giving value and I'm still kind of getting a kick out of working for them. We have other organizations we go in, we do a prepackaged piece of work, they're happy, we're happy, we keep in touch, but we don't do much afterwards. I learned long ago, I tried when I first went into this business to have a product. I drew a little donut shaped thing on a very early version of PowerPoint, and it looked very cool, and I took it to people and went, this is what I'm all about, and it's great, and how many of these do you want? I took it to about 30 people, and they all said, this is brilliant, yeah, very, very good. And for one reason or another, none of them bought it. And this is very good. Other people will definitely buy that, they said. Other people will definitely buy it. Well, unfortunately, none of them did. And I kept going back to Mrs. Crabtree, and she kept pointing at these small human beings who were fast growing and seemed to require a lot of money to keep them going. And she said, might there be a different way of doing this? As a marketeer, she kind of knew what she was doing. And the minute I stopped trying to force what I thought clients needed down their throat and started listening to what they wanted and how they wanted to work and adapted to how they wanted to work, life got immeasurably easier. Frankly, it meant I could send some invoices, which, you know, was kind of handy.
We like invoicing, don't we? We like invoicing. I know everybody on this call likes invoicing. Matt, that's been absolutely fantastic. A couple of things I would mention. I was talking to the chief operating officer of a massive engineering consultancy that I work with yesterday. They did a survey around all their staff, and the survey came out that they expected to be working from home from now on forever, 2 days out of 5. And that was the general opinion. I think that probably sounds about right to me, because you need the physical interaction. You need to get some energy back from people from meeting them. But on the other hand, you don't need an hour each way's commute, or even longer in some people's cases. That was fantastic, Matt. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to stop the recording now, but if you'd like to stay on the line for a little while and answer any questions that people want to take offline, the real white knuckle ones that will get you sitting back in your chair, we'll do that. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining me on YouTube. It's a great pleasure to have you here. There's a number of interviews with top people like Matt Crabtree available for you, and please contact me if you've got any questions or you want any advice or any consultancy on anything in my specialism area. Thanks very much.